So, oh my goodness, we heard so much about what's coming up and not so far into the future. It makes me think about not only how are we going to get skilled and reskilled, how it's going to change the definition of disease. I mean, when you identify people so much earlier in when they have diabetes or heart disease or whatever the disease, is it going to change what the medical profession is going to have to do to change the definition of disease? And so the questions there are just overwhelming. And at the end of the day, we can create all of the technology, but what we need is leadership and accountability and governance in order to make that happen. And so that's what our next speaker is going to talk about. So I'm going to introduce him, and Lou, if you would make yourself to the stage, that would be really super. Thank you. Go ahead and sit right here. So this is Lou DiLorenzo. Yep, this is Lou. And Lou DiLorenzo is Deloitte's US AI and data strategy practice leader. He's a national leader for Deloitte's US CIO program. He leads Deloitte's consulting, US generative AI advisory practice, and the US generative AI market incubator. It's a lot of AI, Lou. It's a lot of AI. It's a lot of AI. He also served as the COO of Bright Health, so you've been on the that side of the yeah. We won't talk about that one, but we know it well. He's also yeah. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. All good people there. All good people. It just didn't turn out quite like they wanted it to. He's also been at Cargill as the global CIO of Food Ingredients and Bioindustrial Division, and he has an MBA from Harvard Business School. And going to talk to us today about leadership and what it takes to make this happen.
Perfect.
So, great. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm good. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
I always like to start with just a personal introduction of what got you interested in AI and data strategy. Like, what's a little bit of that path?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. This is a really important topic, and I'm thrilled that we're taking it on here in Minnesota. In terms of my personal story, I'm a strategist and a commercially oriented person by training, and as well as by experience. When I came to Cargill, I started in corporate strategy. I left Deloitte from the East Coast originally, and found my way into really the career path that I have now as really a technology executive through data and analytics. And I view data and analytics as critical to problem solving. So what are the questions that are on people's minds? Important questions require important data that you can use to make that's really just a conversation about it. And so I spent a bunch of time building that capability for Cargill. But it was all based on financial and operating results backwards, which isn't always how technologists think. And we need both, right? We need technologists that are interested in pushing the envelope on what technology can do. But I'm a big believer in the application of technology yields results. Technology solves problems, but they start with problems. So that led to a successive set of experiences that Arkell described. And that's really been at the heart of what I've been doing. And so been back at Deloitte as a partner for the last 6 years and really working with clients to help them think about how to thoughtfully apply technology. And then obviously been very deep into AI, and generative AI, based on the last few years. What I do like to remind people, and I know this group knows this, is that AI has been around for like a really long time. Gen AI is new, it's novel, it's important, it's changing the way that business gets done. But I use those words specifically, and it was our previous speakers have talked about this. This is fundamentally still about how work gets done. Like, you don't make money, you don't get different results because you installed something. It's about understanding the fundamental changes to how work gets done by people. When they show up, every day, they know what they do, they know, what they're going to use to do it, they feel comfortable doing it, they want to be successful in their job. And so a little bit to the point, I've really been focused on the intersection of people and how they use technology to make better decisions and drive value. So that's what I get to do every day.
So let's start at that big question,
Yeah.
that it is about people and it's about work. So we'll dive deeper into the details, but if you had to describe the leadership qualities of a company that identifies the right AI and this generation of AI to install, what type of leader successfully does that?
One that's empathetic, I would say. And the reason I say that is that we're all people, right? We're part of organizations, we're all students, we're all whatever we are, but we're people. And new things can create anxiety. And new things that are talked about as the most important thing, and they're going to revolutionize how we do things. AI is going to replace jobs. I don't believe that. I think, people that know AI are going to replace those that don't in many areas. But my view is it's very much a human-in-the-loop conversation always. And certainly for the things that we're talking about here, which is pretty high-stakes stuff, it'll always be there. I love the example about the imaging. And again, I think of those as more suggestions, whether we're talking about agents or as we're talking about other things. I think when thoughtfully applied, and I said this at breakfast this morning, but AI is basically like a new person on your team, maybe an intern who works really hard, is super smart, and doesn't give you attitude, right? That's really and I think if we embrace that mentality, we have a good sense for how to actually drive value doing it. But anyway, I bring up empathy because we're all, you're here, right? You're here because AI is everywhere, and it's super important. And our work, my work, is going to change fundamentally, which creates great opportunities. But if you're somebody who can't be here, or doesn't actually have access to high-speed internet, or doesn't have access to courses online to learn about AI, and all you do is hear about how important this is, and it's going to change the world, and you don't actually know how to get better, are you more relaxed or are you more anxious? Anybody want to guess? Right? You're anxious. And so empathetic leaders are people that understand that. And they help their employees understand kind of what I just said, which is it's about helping you focus on the really critical elements of your job so that you can focus on making a difference. And we recognize there's a whole bunch of things that you have to do every day that are important but not critical. And we're going to help you focus on the things that are critical, and your job matters. And we're going to help you understand how to get good at what we're talking about and give you the space to practice. Because when any of us started our first job or a new job, you can't be great at something the first time you do it, right? So the goal is to do it for the first time so you can get busy on the second time. And so leaders that are empathetic and understand that, again, AI is like any technology. It's more sophisticated, it creates great power, but leaders that get the full value out of this new technology, I think, have that attribute.
So you use the word empathy. In other conversations, I think you've also maybe sort of interchangeably used it with the term change management and how important it is. So how does a leader show up when they're empathetic? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think the first is that if they don't tell you that they don't know about it either, they're not being really empathetic. And you might imagine in my business, where I'm in the advice business, if I try to tell somebody with a straight face, I've been doing Gen AI for years, and you're just all catching up, they're probably not going to believe me. Now, we have been using it for years because we've all been using it for a couple of years. But, this is a space that's moving incredibly fast. And so an empathetic leader acknowledges that we're going to learn together. And the results matter, but they're less important than the activity, because that's the way you learn things. That's why we run experiments, and calling them experiments, I think, is really important. It gives people the space to try, not to be focused on, did I do it right? You want to get good at it. You don't want to make the same mistake twice. But I think those are things that matter in this space. So that's one message. I think the other is to, and we've got this up here, so I'll spend just a minute on why this is important, because I think it encapsulates a lot of the pieces. So for the last 5 years, Deloitte has done what we call our State of AI in the Enterprise survey. And it's a pretty comprehensive survey. We get both interviews as well as input from 2,500 global executives, technical leaders, and commercial leaders both. And this year, we did it every quarter, because to do a survey on AI in 2024 once a year is not something interesting to read, right? So we moved to quarterly. So one of the things that the third, and this is on the calendar quarter, so one of the things that came out of our third quarter survey was that 68% of the leaders that we surveyed had started to see value in their application of Gen AI and AI technologies over the last year. And as a result, they were going to spend more money. Great. At the same time, 70% of the same cadre of people that we surveyed said they'd been able to put 30% or fewer of their experiments into production. So scaling is a problem. Now, I think there's a secondary question, which is it realistic to think that you're going to pick the right POC and it's worthy to go into production? My research team thought that I was being a little difficult when I asked that question. And it doesn't negate the broader theme, which scaling matters. So if scaling matters, you ask the question, okay, well, like, what does it take to scale? Now, we're all sort of in healthcare, and we know that, like, if you go to a surgeon, they're going to tell you need surgery. If you got something else, you need pizza, right? So if you ask somebody in the strategy practice at Deloitte, they're going to say, well, the thing that's most important is you need a strategy and a vision. If you talk to somebody on our human capital or change management practice, they're going to tell you, well, it's all about the people, it's all about the workforce, it's about training. If you talk to somebody who's in our technology and architecture practice where they're applying the technology, they'll say, well, listen, if you don't have a flexible architecture, if you don't have data that's in the right spot, you're not going to be able to scale. Well, it turns out that they're all right? And so we built this across our consulting practice. And by the way, this is not specific to AI, right? This is generally about how does work get done? People want to come to work and know what they're doing matters. We're solving interesting problems. We have a vision about where we're going and why it's interesting, what we need to be good at to get there. You're going to help me get good at it. I've got all the right chassis and all the right things to make this work, because at the end of the day, this is a technology solution that's helping us do that. And there are things that, there's better and worse answers to do that. And so anyway, so those are some things that, that we've spent time on. So again, you asked about change management. That is at the heart of this. But without the other components, without that vision, it feels like you're solving an individual problem. People wonder why we're doing it. It feels like one more thing versus this is fundamentally thinking about how we're doing our work differently.
We talked in our prep calls about how we wanted to talk about real use cases, real examples. And I'm wondering if you could share, to the extent that you can, an example of where change management was adequately funded and adequately managed and adequately prioritized, because it isn't so often.
Yeah. I'll give you an example that's a healthcare example that we learned we weren't doing that, and then we did it. So back to scaling. So we had a payer client that's a leading organization in the U.S. That had made a lot of investments, not just POCs, but had put a lot of iron in the ground around this space. They had picked things that matter. One of the things that helps drive change management, I talked about vision, but the thing that I tell my clients when I show up is I want you to think about this through sort of three lenses. The first is be a student of where time is spent in your organization. Number two, where there is variability in the results of that activity. And three, where more consistency in those results would lead to financial and operational differences, like it matters. When people know that they're working on something that matters, they tend to be a little bit more focused on it. So anyway, our client had done those three things. They were working on things that were important. And had invested in change management, right? They sort of had a view of this picture. We were working with them on it. And they weren't seeing the adoption rates that they expected. So they were disappointed. And so we talked about it because we were disappointed too. And so what we said was, well, you know what? Why don't we get different groups of employees together, right? There's affinity groups, there's different logical cohorts. Let's get these groups together and help them understand how they can use AI and Gen AI in their personal lives. Like how it might be able to help them plan a trip, or how it might be able to help them spend time going to the grocery store, or how it might help them do any number of different things. Just like, we're all big users of technology, and one of the things that we individually get frustrated at, depending on the organizations we work for, is that I can do all this stuff at home and I come here and I'm like banging sticks and rocks together. And I don't like that. We had to help these employees understand that AI wasn't something to be afraid of, and there's lots of different things that they could do that was going to make their lives easier. Well, guess what? They started to use it at work. And so, it's just, sometimes it's simple and little things like that, but it fundamentally gets down to, do I understand it? Do I put it in the context of the work that I'm doing? And do I trust what happens as a result? And the more reps you get at something like that, especially something that you know a lot, and you probably care about it being right more than, maybe more than where you work, that really was a big breakthrough for that particular organization.
Brilliant
It's brilliant,
strategy.
right? Brilliant.
I'm going to use that.
Yeah, right? I mean, when I heard it, I was like, well, that's like super obvious. But you know what? We don't always do obvious things. And so that was a big breakthrough for that particular client.
So let's transition to using AI strategically, because not all problems need to be solved
100%.
by the most advanced AI,
Yes.
generative AI solution.
Yep.
And you just said, I loved the high-level framework that you said, which is be a student of variability, where time is spent, and where consistency matters. I'm wondering if you could expand on that.
Sure.
And share with the audience how to manage a group of leaders
Yep.
who want the resources for AI to go to their division. I mean,
Yep.
how do you decide
100%.
who gets the funding and who doesn't, and for what
Yeah.
project?
I'll set aside the personalities and influence and all the things that are ripe, not for AI, but for everything in terms of who gets money and who doesn't. So let's set that aside maybe for a minute. I'll give you two examples, or maybe two themes to think about and some examples for each. So, Arkell, you mentioned, I tell our clients, be on the lookout for PhD level problems, right? Like, again, as you think specifically about Gen AI, like having the right wrench for the right problem is super important, because this thing can be very expensive. And so an example of a PhD level problem that makes a difference to a whole bunch of different people, and I think it was alluded to earlier, is moving through an R&D pipeline more quickly, right? Like, people have been studying that for years, and that's really important. It's important to the organizations that are doing that. It's a competitive advantage. They're spending a ton of money. There are people like us that are waiting for breakthroughs so that we can have a better quality of life, right? So that's a thing that you can get pretty excited about, and we're fortunate that people get excited about that every day. We're using AI and generative AI to work with a number of folks across life sciences to help them accelerate their R&D pipeline. And that's a PhD level problem, and that's worth the investment for the reasons I described. The second is actually, and we were talking about this at breakfast, is an important but very average problem. And so again, if you're students of where time gets spent, we've done research on a bunch of different things, but one of the things that we found is that there are about 11,000 articles written about dermatology globally every year. So that's a lot of stuff, right? And not all of them are good things to read, and a bunch of them are. And I'm not a doctor, I don't have any doctors in my family, but I see doctors, and I know they're super busy, and I know they're really smart people. And I know that people get smarter when they get a chance to invest in their own learning. And it's impossible to figure out which of those 11,000 are the best thing to read all the time. It's impossible to read all those 11,000 things that are worth reading. Generative AI helps you summarize and understand what those documents that are worth reading say, so that you don't just rely on your own experience and your own learning pathways about, I have a routine where I look at these 5 sites every day, I listen to these 3 podcasts. That's important. And there's probably a 5th that's out there that you don't know anything about. And you're not necessarily serving your patient in the best way if you're not being exposed to things that are new. This is a way to do that, and do that at scale. And again, that's not a PhD level problem, but it's a very important one. So anyway, just give you sort of 2 bookends of things that that we think about.
I love that, and great segue to what I want to make sure we have time to talk about, because we're going to transition to questions from the audience in a bit. But so when it summarizes those 11,000 derm articles, it could make a mistake.
Sure.
And it could misinterpret one of the articles, and that could cause harm.
Yep.
So how do you teach people, train people to think before they believe,
Yep.
and then the next question is going to be accountability,
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
So let's talk about the
For sure.
first one.
Yeah.
where It's so easy to accept that answer at face value.
Yep. So I've got 3 kids. They're all at school-age kids. One of them is in college. 2 of them are in high school. And I tell them, if you decide to write a paper using GPT, I promise you people are going to know it. Because you need to be careful. You need to understand what it's actually saying. Again, this is human in the loop that's never going away. Just like in our work today, right? So when you have a conversation, we're thinking about, okay, do I believe what that person has told me? I read this article, I don't actually understand it. They've told me the citations, maybe I'm a little bit curious about it. So it doesn't replace any of those things at all. And so it's critical to be able to continue to be in the conversation. This allows you to be in more conversations that could be important, that are gonna help people, and do that without, sort of making you work, 100 hours a week. But it absolutely does not replace that critical thinking at all. And so that's a message that we send. And again, for many of the things that we're talking about here, it's consistent. I'll give you maybe just a quick example that has nothing to do with healthcare, but you might see the parallels in some cases. So I do work in a lot of different places, and I do some work in manufacturing environments, meaning like plants that build things. And one thing I know that is true is that how a plant runs today is way different than when it was built. And number 2, the operating manual that says this is how the plant runs is wrong. And so we all know there's 4 or 5 people that you go to that have all the knowledge and have all the things, and if this goes wrong, Jimmy, Sally, and Bobby can help us figure it out. And if they're not around, or they're all at lunch at the same time, people start looking at each other and they don't know how to solve the problem. In that environment, people are retiring, right? So they're, which is great. They've dedicated their lives to doing whatever good work is there. And so there's a lot of concern about brain drain. And so conversations that we're having with our clients is using audio to text to interview Jimmy, Sally, and Bobby about everything they know about that facility, and helping to create a better, Gen AI capability to solve problems in that environment. So when the next generation of people show up on day 1, they actually have a fighting chance to be accretive. And Jimmy, Sally, and Bobby are happy to do that because it isn't like you're sucking their brains out. It's that this is a way to memorialize their life's work. And so again, back to the leadership of understanding that conversation can go a lot of different ways. This is their legacy that's going to help them at scale serve the clients, the customers that they're serving, and to continue to let their legacy live on for the organization that they've dedicated their lives to. So anyway, I could talk about this stuff all day. I get pretty excited about it.
So I'm just going to push it a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure.
And you said, we keep giving the message that you have to think, you have to have critical thinking before you implement whatever it says in the generative AI response.
Yep.
But how do you, we are human, right? It is,
For sure. Yep.
It is really easy to be busy and take it at face value. How do you drive accountability on that? How do you drive consistent thinking before you act?
Yep.
And especially in healthcare, where the implications of making a mistake, even one time, could be disastrous.
Yeah, for sure. It's an important question. So I look at it a couple of different ways. The first is that all of us, and whether healthcare or otherwise, we're accountable for the outcome, right? Like that's our job. Like doesn't matter if the person on your team gave you analysis that wasn't great or whatever it is, like in my work, I'm accountable for the engagements that we do. And I've got a whole bunch of people that usually are on my team helping me do that. And my job is to make sure that it's right. And if it's not, it's my fault. Like I am accountable, personally accountable for that. That I think is number 1. Number 2, and I've touched on this a little bit, but I need to feel accountable for the implications if something happens. And I can only do that if I understand the meaning behind the work, right? If it's like, okay, it's a presentation, okay, well, whatever. No, it's not a presentation. There's a whole bunch of things that happen based on what we're going to talk about today. And I need to wake up thinking about that and owning that in a way that, is not a job. This is real stuff. Obviously, there's no better, field for that to be real every day than it is in healthcare. And third, I think, it's really about helping understand where I can make things a little bit easier. So again, I think about one of the other studies we did is there's about 2.7 hours of PJ time that happens for providers, right? Where they're doing clinical notes and all different kinds of things. That's a lot of time. If we understand that and we understand the things that they have to do, and we're students of where effort, and all of that effort is really important for a whole bunch of reasons that are obvious. If I'm focused on using technology to make that easier without sacrificing quality, I'm gonna get that person excited about why they went into medicine in the first place. And so again, that's the meaning associated with the work, which is why it's an important problem to solve, and they get back to being accountable for the outcome.
Okay.
So anyway, that's how I think about it.
Last question, and then I'm turning it to
Yeah,
all of you.
sure.
Have you ever seen someone held accountable? Other than your kids, right, and their tests,
yeah.
when they use ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen someone held accountable for not thinking before acting?
Yeah, I have. I mean, and I would say, early innings for sure, right? When this space was moving quickly, and you've got people using new technology, powerful technology, that was immature, right? We didn't have lineage on all the things. We didn't know where the answers came from, and people weren't curious about that, or they were, wow, this is great. It's almost like I found the answer to the test, so I didn't have to do the work, right? So I would say for sure, and those would be in, both in organizations that I'm directly related to, and also related to organizations that I serve. So I think most of those, I would say, were not, all of them. None of them were bad actor oriented, right? I would say those were gaps in understanding, and that's also why, personally, the topic of risk and governance and all those things are super important. And I tell my clients, I go, listen, there's a few different ways to look at rules, right? Rules can feel like they are restrictive. I said, I tend to think of rules as you're helping me chalk the field, and now I actually can explore the studio space and do all the things that I want, because I know where the boundaries are. If I don't know where the boundaries are, I'm gonna play it safe. But if I know where the boundaries are and I'm comfortable, operating in that, I'm gonna come up with a whole bunch of, things that nobody's ever thought about before. And so when people have been held accountable, I think it's because the boundaries weren't as clear as they are now, would be my, and I'm sure there's others, by the way, but my direct experience would fall into that category.
Thank you for answering that question.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's open it up to all of you. Sheila. One moment.
Lou, what advice are you giving your clients about how their workforce can learn the prompting that's needed to really optimize what they get out of their LLMs?
That's a huge, so prompt engineering is a huge skill that is required now for most knowledge workers going forward, I would say. There are courses that we've worked on with universities that we deploy. So we have AI academies. If you go online, you'll see all different kinds of ways to do it on your own. But certainly when we think about the workforce of the future, we talk about the workflow and processes, and then the skills that are required to execute those processes. And then in some cases, we customize the training. In other cases, we'll help point them to something that depends on their situation. But what you talked about is a really important skill that that organizations are and leaning into. We are doing the same. So one thing that I didn't touch on is that the business of consulting is going through the same transformation, both on the advisory side, so like work that I get a chance to do, so helping to solve problems, as well as installing things. So a big part of, when you think about technology, solving problems, where are we going? Why is it interesting? All that up front, what's the strategy? And then let's make it come to life, and we usually have to build things to make that happen. We're using Gen AI capabilities to help our clients do that more effectively at higher quality and cheaper. So we've done a whole bunch of work internally before we did that with clients, and so the amount of time that is in the software development lifecycle, which is the way to bring things to life in the context that I just described, we saw about a 20 to 30% improvement, reduction of effort that went into that. Now that, we're not seeing that everywhere with all of our clients, but the point is that you can do things, faster the first time, test things more frequently, and again, allow your engineering people to work on more important engineering problems than the same problem all the time, which means that they're going to be really excited. So anyway, again, as you think about the work, but certainly skills like prompt engineering for many of us are going to be critically important going forward. Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
So as someone that someone that graduates in a month and is entering corporate America for the first time,
Yep.
what can I do as entering the workforce to put myself from the rest and ask the right questions to my employer and get ahead of the game?
Yep. Well, the great news is that you've been trained on how to do that based on the school that you've gone to, right? So, again, AI is a mechanism to have a bigger impact. Where you started is that you've got great training, you've got great experience, you know how to listen, you know how to be a thoughtful leader, you know how to ask good questions. That doesn't change. When I give advice to people that are just starting in the workforce, my advice is to anticipate and be indispensable. Gen AI skills, just like, I'm dating myself, but if you were somebody who was really great at Excel, like you were never not busy, right? Because they're like, oh my God, this is amazing, can you help me do, right? I mean, for sure. This is like that. And so if you're someone who's great at prompt engineering, or you get something that someone says, hey, can you give me this in 3 days, and you come back in half an hour? So get good at that, right? So get really good at understanding the business problem, for sure, and then understanding the different open source models and different capabilities and how to use them to be able to present back, the answers to those questions, and frankly, anticipate the questions that, the people you're working with should be asking, but they're not. And then you can come back with an answer to say, hey, I answered the mail, right? So always follow instructions, right? I got advice a long time ago that says, when somebody asks you to do that. And if you think they should be doing something else, do that too. And the ability to do that at scale has never been higher using the capabilities that we're talking about here. But it won't replace the hustle, the attitude, the orientation, good listening. What are the problems to solve? How do you think about that? So be confident you've been trained in that and get pretty good at this stuff too.
Anticipate and be indispensable equals express your curiosity.
That's right.
We have time for one last question.
Hey, thanks. This has been great. In the vein of accountability and change management, you've talked about the importance of these things. And in that same vein, I guess, adoption is challenging and adoption over time. So how to increase adoption rate? What advice do you give to leaders about how to do so, and what mix of human and technology are you using to do that?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in counting things. And what I mean by that is when you deploy a technology, you should be doing it with a specific end in mind, right? So whatever that is, AI or otherwise. And I'm a big believer in understanding utilization. So who's using it and who's not? They got the training, they got the login, was that the last time they went? And then ask them why they're not doing it. Again, back to the example that I gave with our payer client, those were some of the things, but it started with an understanding of, we expected these results, we didn't see them, and in some cases it could be structural things, right? Like, hey, it was slow, right? Because again, we're all humans, and if something doesn't meet the speed of business, we're not going to use it. So make sure you sort of run those traps around, operational excellence. If, the training was ineffective, and you can look at the scores of how people thought the training went, right? Was it a 3 or was it a 5? If it's a 3, then, just because you trained them didn't mean that they actually learned something from it. So, there's a lot of threads to pull on to understand why things are different than you expected, and then what to do about it. And then, and then you kind of keep running it. And so, things that I look for are, number one, am I getting more people to use it every week? Because that's great. Are there things is there a couple people that are using it all the time? How do I put a spotlight on them so that people aren't hearing me talk about it, they're hearing them talk about it? Am I getting people using it a little bit longer every week, right? Because that means it's like a different version of same store sales, right? So there's different, I think, ways to understand, are you making progress or not? And what are some things that might tell you you've got some work to do in that? And the good news is that the ability to count those things that I described is super easy, and then it's just applying, some of that empathetic leadership and just understanding human behavior to then try, right? And just because you try something that doesn't work doesn't mean you can't, you need to keep trying something, but also give some time for people to practice, what are some burn-in, moments where you can actually draw the line and say, hey, we got a problem here versus people are still learning, kind of thing. So important question, thank you.
Lou, thank you so much.
Yeah, this was a blast. Thanks
Really
for having me.
appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
Great.
No, really, we're going to go to a break in 1 minute, but I just want to close by saying that it's so wonderful to hear that the leading word you used on how to make this happen at a leadership level is empathy. And I think we all need to remember what that means and then how to execute on it. And the last thing I'll say on a more humorous note is that if you ever get out of consulting and AI and data, you have a great radio voice.
Well, thank you very much. I do have a podcast called Techfluential with the Wall Street Journal where I bring on tech leaders to talk about their stories and how to drive commercial value. So that is a side hustle and a second act of mine. So
There you go. There you go. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.